Cloud could again allow temperatures to dip maybe close to freezing. And the thick cloud in the northwest of Scotland, where there will still be a brisk breeze blowing, may produce the odd spot of drizzly rain as we go into Sunday. But for most, again, the wind's light on Sunday, so lighter than today, and just a lot of cloud around, certainly over central and eastern parts further west and across parts of Scotland. Better chance on Sunday of seeing some longer spells of sunshine. And again, it will be on the mild side with temperatures mostly 9 to 11 degrees Celsius. That's all from me for now. Goodbye.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes, back on the TV
Surprised
with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon and welcome to The Briefing. I'm Arlene Foster and here's what's coming up over the next hour. Well, some good news for you all at home. Despite endless warnings, the UK has narrowly avoided going into recession. This is despite a sharp 0.5% fall in economic output during December, which has been blamed on strike action across the country. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt said the figures show underlying resilience, but said we are not out of the woods. But are we out of the woods in regards to recession? We'll be exploring this in depth. And it's crunch time for the Ukrainian president as he enters the last day of his European tour. It's been a busy week for Mr. Zelenskyy as he tries to convince his European counterparts to supply Ukrainian forces with fighter jets to aid the war effort. Will Zelenskyy walk away empty-handed? We'll bring you the latest. More than 21,000 people are now known to have died in Monday's earthquakes in Turkey and Syria, with the United Nations warning the full extent of the disaster is yet unclear. Rescuers are still searching rubble for survivors, but hopes are fading more than 4 days since the first quake. We'll have the latest images and developments throughout the show. And of course, I want to hear from you. Give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. But first, here's the news with Rihanna.
Arlene, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Turkey's president has admitted his country's response to Monday's devastating earthquakes isn't as fast as he wants it to be. Rescue workers say the golden period for finding survivors in the south of the country and northern Syria is closing. Amongst the devastation, though, glimmers of hope 4 days on. A 10-day-old baby has been rescued along with his mother. The death toll has now risen to more than 21,900 people. Recep Tayyip Erdogan says rescue efforts aren't going as he'd hoped.
Despite the fact that we've gathered perhaps one of the largest search and rescue teams to the region, with more than 141,000 members, unfortunately, it's a fact that we've not been able to respond as fast as we'd hoped.
In Syria, the head of the White Helmets response group has accused the UN of failing to deliver aid to rebel-held areas. Raed al-Saleh called the response catastrophic, claiming the region hadn't received any support since the disaster struck. At least 3,000 people are known to have died in the country. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has visited a hospital in Aleppo on his first reported visit to the affected region. Mike, here the Chancellor has warned the UK isn't out of the woods yet. It's after the latest figures show the economy narrowly avoided falling into recession in the final quarter of last year. The data from the Office for National Statistics reveals the economy saw zero growth between October and December. The final month of 2022 saw GDP down by 0.5%, but overall the annual GDP rate grew by 4.1%. The Chancellor has welcomed the figures, but warns there's still more to be done.
Well, the fact that we have avoided recession, in fact we're the fastest growing major country last year, shows there is underlying resilience in the UK economy. But we are not out of the woods. Inflation is still much too high. That is causing pain for families up and down the country, which is why we need to stick to our plan to halve inflation. If we do that and play to our strengths in science and technology, we really can be one of the most prosperous countries in Europe.
The Chancellor also says there's no new major initiative to help those struggling with energy bills from April when the energy price guarantee rises. Bills for a typical household are set to increase from £2,500 to £3,000. The government's been under pressure to offer additional help for people to cope with soaring costs. It comes as the government says energy suppliers have agreed to end the forced installation of prepayment meters in the homes of vulnerable people. Ambulance service workers in England are striking today in a long-running dispute over pay, jobs and conditions. Around 15,000 staff are taking part in the walkout, with Unison members balloting another 10,000 over the coming weeks. The government says constructive talks are being held, but the unions accused it of not negotiating. University employees are also on strike for the second day this week, with more than 70,000 staff at 150 universities taking action. Friends of Nicola Bulley have gathered for a second roadside appeal to mark 2 weeks since her disappearance. Lancashire Police says it's searching for the missing mother of 2, and the search has moved towards the coast. The force is now searching further downstream where the River Wyre becomes tidal. Ukraine's Prime Minister says Russia has launched more than 50 missiles at the country today. The capital's Mayor Vitaly Klitschko claims that 10 have been shot down over Kyiv. The attack has caused damage to power grids at 6 locations, but there are no confirmed casualties. Schools in the capital have been forced to evacuate and continue with their classes at underground stations. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has also addressed a UK-led summit to discuss Russia's participation at next year's Olympics in Paris. It follows warnings his country could boycott the Games over the issue. The International Olympic Committee says it will explore a pathway for athletes from Russia and Belarus to compete as neutrals. But the move has been criticised following the invasion of Ukraine, with Zelenskyy saying they shouldn't be allowed to take part even under a neutral flag. The Lithuanian sports minister says all 35 countries who attended the meeting agreed to demand that the IOC ban Russian and Belarusian athletes from taking part. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as we have it, but for now, it's back to Arlene with the briefing.
Welcome to the show. Well, the UK has managed to avert recession, just. After a negative third quarter, there has been no growth in the final quarter. For a recession to happen, there has to be 2 negative quarters. This has not happened. And the absence of growth comes at a time when Liz Truss, who placed growth at the centre of her premiership, is attempting to return to the political fray. Today it was also revealed that a new AstraZeneca factory would be built in the Republic of Ireland rather than in the United Kingdom. The Chancellor has said Britain's business taxation needs to be more competitive. Well, joining me now to discuss all of this is Chief Economic Advisor at the Centre for Economic and Business Research, Vicky Price, and Director General at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Mark Littlewood. Turning first to you, Vicky, he says we're not out of the woods yet, but that actually the economy is more resilient than many had feared. Is that your take on today's announcement?
Up to a point, yes. But if you look at what's been going on since December, because those figures that we saw today look to the last quarter, this quarter is already starting rather badly in the sense that we've got data for manufacturing, for services and construction, which show a further decline in activity in January. And the expectation is that it's not going to be much better in February, which is where we are now. So the first quarter, by most calculations, is probably going to see a decline in GDP. And also, of course, we may get revisions as far as last quarter and the quarter before is concerned. There was a revision already that the middle quarter or the third quarter of 2022 only dropped by 0.2%. This last quarter of 2022, quarter four, saw practically stagnation. Anything could happen to reverse that figure down or perhaps also up, frankly. But the indications are nevertheless that this slowdown in activity that was very evident in December, we had a 0.5% fall in the month, we must remember that, is continuing in 2023.
So, Mark, I think what Vicky's saying is, whilst it may not technically be a recession, for some it will feel like a recession nonetheless.
Yes, I agree with everything Vicky's just said. Sometimes I think we get a bit over-obsessed about, are we technically in recession or technically not in recession? The truth is, if these statistics are accurate, we've avoided a recession, I think, by 0.01% of GDP. Hardly anything to be particularly pleased about. So the real broad brush picture, I think, is that's much more interesting and much more challenging is, even if by a whisker we're avoiding recession, why is our general growth rate so disappointing? Somewhere around 0%. We can argue if it's just dipped below 0 or is just above 0. I agree with Vicky that I'd actually, as a guess, expect the first quarter of 2023 to be probably quite grim figures. But nevertheless, the broad picture is that in rough and ready terms, we're flatlining. And that is an extremely disappointing long-term position for the United Kingdom to be in. So we need to, I think, relook what the government's doing, its spending patterns, our tax rates, the scale of regulation, in order to try to get back to what have been the historical normal growth rates of around about 2 or 3% per annum that now look heroically optimistic as growth rates now in 2023.
And Mark, you mentioned taxation there. Of course, there's this announcement, I think it might have been an announcement made some time ago, but it's been talked about today, of AstraZeneca deciding to build this new factory in the Republic of Ireland. And of course, their corporation tax, as we know, is 12.5%. Ours is now about to rise to double that, to 25%. That is a problem, is it not?
Yes, tax rates have consequences. We assume I guess the starting assumption is if you dial up the rates, you'll bring more revenue into the Treasury. But of course, taxation has dynamic effects. It has effects on people's behaviour. And AstraZeneca, I think their reasoning was more around the NHS levy, a complex interrelationship between private pharmaceutical companies and the National Health Service. But you're quite right, Arlene, that, high corporation tax, all things equal, will deter investment. No great surprise that companies find the Republic of Ireland's rate rather attractive and Britain's rate rather unattractive. And I would say it's even worse than that, really. High taxation can be a deterrent, but so can uncertain taxation. It was only a few months ago when Jeremy Hunt, now the Chancellor, was running to be the leader of the Conservative Party, who was advocating a corporation tax rate of 15%. Then we had the Truss administration making it 19%, and now it's 25%. So whatever the rate, I think businesses like some sort of degree of certainty about taxation, and successive British governments haven't really provided them with that, especially not over the last 12 months.
And certainly, Vicky, there's been plenty of certainty around the taxation rate in the Republic of Ireland. It's been 12.5% for a long, long time now. What's your take on this decision from AstraZeneca?
Well, it's bad news. There's no doubt about that. And we've seen also some of that in the manufacturing sector more generally, including the car industry. It remains to be seen what happens next. We know that we are having difficulty even establishing a proper manufacturing of batteries, so we'll miss out on the electric vehicle revolution, if you like. But there is no doubt that companies are looking for some certainty, and I agree with Mark on that. The interesting thing, though, about Ireland, just to think about that for a second, is that, of course, they do have a very low corporation tax rate, but they also are probably going to be coming under this new obligation, which is to have a minimum global corporation tax for multinationals. So whether that rate will stay at 12.5% is another factor.
Well, they've managed to keep it for quite a while, as I think you know, Vicky. That's Vicky Price and Mark Littlewood joining me to discuss the recession that didn't happen today, but which may well happen in the near future. Thank you both so much. I'm joined in the studio by Emma Wolfe. Emma's staying with me throughout the programme. Emma, what's your take on the announcements that came today on the recession?
Well, obviously I defer to Vicky and Mark on this.
Sure, yes.
But, you know, the fact is 2023, the indications are not good.
No.
We may have just avoided technical recession, but what I'm interested in is the reality of people's lives. People's lives feel, everybody at the moment is feeling the pinch. Their lives are, the inflation rate is maybe levelling out, maybe dropping, but the reality for people's lives is that food prices are still going up.
Sure.
Fuel prices are still going up. There's no sort of certainty beyond April. So let's actually see. But people don't feel as though we are not in recession. People feel as though we're very much in recession at the moment.
Yeah, energy costs, food bills taking up so much of people's
Exactly.
income.
Half the country on strike on any given day. So I think it's a pretty depressing outlook. And what is going to change? We keep, you know, there's no end in sight for the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
We keep hearing about that. We hear that energy prices are levelling out or going to fall. Well, again, you know, there doesn't seem to be any change on the horizon. So until there's a bit of confidence in the market, until there's a bit of confidence amongst consumers, I can't see anything really changing in 2023 that's going to improve these figures.
A bit of hope, a bit of aspiration, I think.
Well, maybe when spring comes, we'll all feel a bit more positive. I don't know.
Well, let's hope so. But now we're going to have a little look at the latest results of GB News' People's Poll. The Conservative vote remains at a flat 21%, no big surprises there this week, leaving Labour with half of the national vote, according to the poll. And when asked about which political party people think would be the best at managing Brexit, 17% say the Labour Party, 16% say the Conservative Party, and a large proportion of the public, 40%, say they don't know which party would be best at managing Brexit. Under the triple lock, the state pension is supposed to increase each year in line with whichever is the highest. That's inflation, average earnings or 2.5%. And only 11% of the public say they believe this policy will still exist in 5 years. 47% of the public don't believe that the triple lock on state pensions will still exist in 5 years, and 9% prefer not to say, and 33% say that they don't know. Among Conservative voters, 16% say they believe that the policy will still exist in 5 years, whereas only 9% of Labour voters believe that the policy will still exist in 5 years. Well, let's go live now to Westminster, where our political reporter, Olivia Utley, is. Hi, Olivia. What struck you about this latest People's Poll?
Well, it's very bad news indeed for the Conservatives. And of course, we have seen figures like this, 21, 22% for the past few weeks, even months. But to be getting these figures so consistently is pretty bleak for the Tories, and it's not looking like it's going to get much better anytime soon. There's still this row at the centre of the Conservative Party, which we saw flare up over the summer in the leadership competition between Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak over whether to raise or to lower taxes. And those who believe that it's time to lower taxes, they're now styling themselves the Conservative Growth Coalition, led by Liz Truss and Simon Clarke, believe that things like raising corporation tax from 19 to 25% 3%, as is being threatened in the March budget, is a sure way to stifle bottom-up growth and leave us in the sort of stagnation that we're seeing at the moment, as we've discussed, only just avoiding recession. Whereas those of the Jeremy Hunt, Rishi Sunak sort of fiscally prudent mindset believe that only by raising taxes can we get a grip on inflation, and only with a stable inflationary rate can we continue to grow. So that argument is sort of eating away at the Conservative Party, and we're seeing it in the very real divisions between, Liz Truss coming out and speaking out against Rishi Sunak's taxing plan. So we've got these very low figures for the Conservative, pretty much unprecedented to be seeing this over and over again, week in, week out, with almost no change at all, and very little sign of it getting any better. Of course, there was a by-election yesterday, and all the usual by-election caveats. Turnout was very low indeed, only around 30%. But if you replicated those figures across the country, you would see 424 seats for Labour and just 138 for the Conservatives. So what really struck me in that poll is just the consistency of those bad results for the Conservatives, and no particular sign of it getting any better anytime soon.
Yeah, and Olivia, I was really struck in terms of the People's Poll by the triple lock issue, the state pensions issue, where, of course, when inflation is high, that means that the pensions have to go up in relation to inflation, whereas other people are struggling in terms of their wages. What did you take out of that People's Poll finding?
Well, it's really interesting that it's expected, most people think that the policy won't be in place in 5 years' time. And of course, the triple lock policy is very controversial indeed, because as you say, when inflation is in double figures like it is at the moment, you see pensioners doing relatively pretty well and working families really, really struggling. But the Conservatives know that famously Conservative voters tend to be grey voters, huge broad brush stroke there, but we do know that Conservative voters on average are over 50, possibly over 60 now. So the Conservatives historically have been very, very reluctant to get rid of this very expensive policy. But the interesting thing is now that if people don't even think that it's going to be there in 5 years' time, it might give the Conservatives a little bit of leeway to move themselves away from this very expensive policy, because it might be that it's already baked in. Pensioners already expect it to be scrapped anyway. So that might be a glimmer of hope for the Conservatives. We know that Sunak is keen to get rid of that policy. Perhaps this might give them an opening to do so.
Olivia, they're in sunny Westminster. Thanks for joining us today. What did you make of the People's Poll and some of those things we've been talking about?
Well, as Olivia says, it's consistently bad results for the Conservatives.
Sure.
Yesterday, Nadine Dorries, more Tory MPs leaving, announcing that they're leaving the party. And that'll happen a lot more as we run up to 2024. The Rishi kind of bounce didn't happen, really. No. The taxation, the tension, the divisions are only going to mount up between now and the March budget. So, and then these really unhelpful interventions, well, quite fun for the rest of us, but unhelpful interventions from Liz Truss and Boris Johnson popping up on television and writing long articles and all of that. Divisions seem to be getting worse. And as we say, not great news on the economy. So strikes carrying on. And it doesn't look good at all for the Conservatives, does it?
I mean, you made reference there to Boris and to Liz Truss and their interventions and their opinions. Of course, we're all very interested in what they have to say because they're former prime ministers and they're huge figures within the Conservative Party. But my goodness, I was once a leader. To have your former leaders come in and say X, Y and Z, it's very destabilising and it's very unhelpful.
And it's almost as though Rishi Sunak can't catch a break. They keep coming back. And we know also, results out today showing that Boris Johnson is still the most popular leader since 2019. I think that was also in your People's Poll. It's just not stabilising. He was going to be the kind of, stabilising pair of hands. Not very exciting, but I don't think Sunak has achieved that yet. Things are not, as steady. Hasn't yet steadied the ship. And meanwhile, Labour are sort of
bouncing along.
They haven't done anything disastrous. Nothing disastrous. They haven't had any scandals. They haven't had any big tax scandals.
We did have Jared O'Meara yesterday being sentenced to jail.
But which hasn't really been in the headlines.
Hasn't really cut through. Hasn't really cut through. If it was a Tory member, I would imagine it would have.
They haven't announced any big policies, but we wait.
OK, well, we'll come back to Emma later on in the show. But coming up, Andrea Leadsom is going to join me to discuss the government's investment in family hubs. Is this a good use of public money? And we will have the latest on the disappearance of Nicola Bulley. But before that, let's have a short break.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family. Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you.
GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online. Across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back to the show. Well, yesterday the government announced £300 million of investment to develop family hubs across 75 local government authorities. These new hubs will provide support for families to ensure the early years development of their children goes as smoothly as possible. The first 1,000 days of a child's life are considered the most important. This new policy comes at a time when the Princess of Wales has also launched her own campaign as well. I'm now delighted to say I'm joined by Conservative MP Dame Andrea Leadsom, who has been a leading advocate of these policies and co-wrote an article with the Prime Minister just yesterday. Andrea, thank you so much for joining me. I know it's a busy day in the constituency, but tell us why it's important to have these family hubs across the country.
Well, essentially, the period from conception to the age of 2 is the time when the lifelong blocks for emotional and physical well-being are laid down. So if you get the first 2 years right, then that baby will go on to feel more emotionally secure, the baby will be healthier, more school ready, and so on throughout that baby and then later child's life. So actually the foundation is just the most important part. And so for me, it's just extraordinary that we've never really focused on this before. And I know a lot of people say, well, we had Sure Starts, but actually Sure Starts didn't focus on the services and support that parents and carers want and need in that critical early period. And that's what family hubs are going to deliver.
And Andrea, I was really struck when I was reading the article that you wrote with the Prime Minister yesterday about the digitisation of red books. And I remember those red books very well when I had my children. And the fact is, if they're not digitised, then they can't be shared across different health professionals. And you might think that's a very simple thing to do, but it's a very meaningful thing to do, isn't it? And it's something that I think will make a real difference.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's one of the sort of less noticed parts of the rollout of the family hubs and Best Start for Life. But actually digitising that red book so that every baby has their own health notes. Now, my ambition, which I have to admit I haven't yet achieved, is that every baby should have an NHS number before they're born. So in the third trimester, because at the moment, when you're born as a baby, your health notes are effectively your mum's notes. And so in the very sad cases where babies are taken into care, all too often we hear from foster carers that they knew nothing about what had happened to the baby before coming into their care. So that's obviously at the most extreme end. But just in life generally, imagine how fantastic it would be if I could actually look back and see, right, this was what happened to me when I was born, this is what I weighed, this was my immunisations, I need to have that one, or I didn't get this illness, or I had a squint, you know, in my case I had a squint, didn't realise that until recently. So actually that digital record is going to really transform from safeguarding to just parental knowledge about their baby, and then for the baby themselves when they grow up.
And these family hubs are coming out at a time when, of course, the Princess of Wales has launched her new campaign. And we're really starting to understand that the life of a child is those couple of first years, which, let's face it, people used to say, oh, the child won't remember or she'll not have any knowledge of what happened. Those adverse childhood experiences that might happen to young people do have a real impact, Andrea, on the child's life.
That is so right. And I completely take my hat off to the Princess of Wales for the work she's doing to highlight this area. And when you're born as a human being, we are unique in the animal kingdom in the extent of our underdevelopment. If you think about it, a cat, an elephant, they can all sort of stand, walk around, fend for themselves for minutes, if not hours after birth. But the human baby is totally vulnerable until they're at least a year old and more like 2 years old. But the physical underdevelopment is just a part of it. The baby's brain is only partially formed at birth, and those millions of neural connections are being made constantly at the rate of about 1 million a second in the first year of life. And they are all connected as a result of that baby's earliest experiences. So a baby that receives loving care from its adult carers will actually learn in its neural connections that the world is generally a good and safe place. And that baby will learn that as something for life. Whereas the baby that's neglected or abused will develop a very different approach to life that will stay with them throughout their life on this earth.
Well, Andrea, thank you so much for joining me. I know, as I say, it's a busy day for you, and I really do appreciate you coming on, but I wanted to develop that story today, and thank you for coming on and chatting to us. Well, joining me in the studio, thank you. Joining me in the studio is author and political commentator Emma Wolfe. Emma, for me, this is a very important intervention, isn't it?
I have a 2-year-old, so I'm still doing the lugging around the red book thing. And I always forget it, and it's quite big and heavy, and it's cumbersome, and I think the digitisation of that is very, very important. You shouldn't need to be remembering that and, you know, trying to keep it all together and all of that. I mean, if this is genuinely new money, because some of it I'm worried that it has been announced before in 2019, if this is 300 million of genuinely new money, then I think it's a fantastic thing. It's like investing in health rather than catching up with people decades later when they're ill. Of course we need to invest in children. Those early years, the first 1,000 days, scary to think that that's all happened, you know, in the first 2 years. But those first 1,000 days, in terms of setting the emotional foundations, good nutrition, good physical, good secure attachment, all of that we can give to children is hugely important in terms of, you know, just later health. So, yeah, I mean, this has to be applauded, but also family hubs where, you know, when you're a new mother, you can go, or your new parent, you can go with your children and meet other families. That kind of thing is very, very important for
So you're not isolated if you're on your own.
You're not isolated,
Absolutely. Absolutely,
exactly.
I agree totally. Well, now we're going to take a look back at a sad story which we talked about last week. It's now 2 weeks since mother Nicola Bulley disappeared, and as police ramp up all efforts to try and find her, with extending search efforts to the sea, as we heard last week on this programme, the police officials have this main hypothesis that the young mother had fallen into the river. But another week has passed and we have little to no more information on her whereabouts. We're going to cross now to GB News reporter Sophie Reaper, who has been following the case for us. Sophie.
Well, it has been 2 weeks now since Nicola Bulley disappeared while she was walking her dog Willow at a beauty spot here in St Michael's on Wyre. Police, as you say there, are still working on the theory that she may have fallen into the water and are therefore continuing with their search of the River Wyre. This morning, Nicola's friends gathered here at Garstang Road with pictures of the 45-year-old in order to try and jog the memory of anyone driving past who may have also been driving past that morning. Now, you may be able to see behind me, this is a fairly busy road, and so Nicola's friends are convinced that someone may have seen something. Police are also quite keen to speak to anyone who may have been driving past between 9 and 10 a.m. on Friday the 27th of January, that morning when Nicola first went missing. They say that the only exit to the area where Nicola disappeared from that doesn't have CCTV is this one over my left shoulder, and so in order to try and negate the theory that Nicola may have exited that way, they want to speak to anyone who may have been driving past and may have seen anything. Now, of course, there's also a dispersal order here in St Michael's on Wyre, and what that does is it gives police the power to act against anyone who's acting antisocially. Now, the problem has gotten so bad that a local security firm has been approached by the local community and they are now patrolling the area. I spoke to one a little bit earlier and he told me that the problem has gotten so bad that the local community don't feel safe, that they've been inundated by YouTubers and TikTokers who are travelling to the area in order to try and cover this mystery on their channel. But police and Nicola's friends are asking people not to come because it's doing nothing to help their investigation to find Nicola Bulley.
Sophie in Lancashire, thank you so much for joining us. Well, coming up in the briefing, we'll get the latest from Turkey and Syria as the news of the death toll surpasses 21,000. And we'll also have the latest on the Northern Ireland Protocol. Are we edging closer to a deal? And President Zelenskyy, he's been touring Europe this week. Will he finally get the fighter jets he is after? But first of all, here's Rhiannon with your news headlines.
Arlene, thank you. It's 2:33. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The death toll has now risen to more than 22,000 following Monday's devastating earthquakes in southern Turkey and northern Syria. Rescue workers say the golden period for finding survivors is closing. Amongst the devastation, though, glimmers of hope. 4 days on, a 10-day-old baby has been rescued along with his mother. Though Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says rescue efforts aren't going as fast as he'd hoped.
Despite the fact that we've gathered perhaps one of the largest search and rescue teams to the region, with more than 141,000 members, unfortunately, it's a fact that we've not been able to respond as fast as we'd hoped.
In Syria, the head of the White Helmets response group has accused the UN of failing to deliver aid to rebel-held areas. He's called the response catastrophic, claiming the region hasn't received any support since the disaster struck. At least 3,000 people are known to have died in the country. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad visited a hospital in Aleppo this morning in his first reported trip to the affected region. Back here, the Chancellor has warned the UK isn't out of the woods yet. It's after the latest figures show the economy narrowly avoided falling into recession in the final quarter of last year. The data from the Office for National Statistics reveals the economy saw zero growth between October and December. The final month of 2022 saw GDP down by 0.5%. But overall, the annual GDP rate grew by 4.1%. The Chancellor's welcomed the figures, but warns there's still more to be done.
Well, the fact that we have avoided recession, in fact, we're the fastest growing major country last year, shows there is underlying resilience in the UK economy. But we are not out of the woods. Inflation is still much too high. That is causing pain for families up and down the country, which is why we need to stick to our plan to halve inflation. If we do that and play to our strengths in science and technology, we really can be one of the most prosperous countries in Europe.
TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. The briefing with Arlene is back in just a moment.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the show. Well, more than 22,000 people are now known to have died in Monday's earthquakes in Turkey and Syria, with the United Nations warning that the situation is only going to get worse. Rescues are still searching rubble for survivors, but hopes are fading more than 4 days since the first quake. Tens of thousands of people have spent a freezing fourth night in makeshift shelters after losing their homes. Turkey's president has called the earthquake the disaster of the century. Well, joining me now is UCL student and Red Cross campus representative Elise Osberg. She joins me now from Istanbul. Thank you so much for joining us from Turkey this afternoon, Elise. I mean, what's your sense being there as to what's happening at the moment?
I just arrived to Istanbul yesterday, and coming from London to Istanbul, the city has been very silent. Everyone's back at their homes or at donation centers, trying to do their best to help. It's just devastating to even see Istanbul in such state. We're all crying. We're all so sad over the situation, trying to find ways to help as well. And this is how Istanbul is right now.
Yeah, and I mean, Istanbul's always I was privileged to be there last year, is always such a busy city. Everything's going on in the city, and it's interesting that you say it's quite a silent city at this point in time, given everything that's happened to the south of Turkey and into Syria. I mean, after a national disaster like this, Elise, comes disease and cholera and awful diseases like that. I mean, what are the plans? Do you know of any plans to try and deal with that after, of course, the search and rescue part of the mission is over? We move on to the control of disease, don't we?
I think the mission for now, what I hope the Turkish government will do as well, is to build new homes for the people who are homeless right now. Yeah. And we've called for international help as well. We're looking for international help because the earthquake didn't happen only in just one city. It affected many different cities in which thousands of people live there. Thousands of people have already lost their lives. So what we need to do right now is to first help with first rescue, first aid, and then help build the cities from basically nothing. And if you look at the videos as well, there's nothing left in the cities. I think first rescue is what's important right now, and then building the cities back.
And those are live pictures that are coming in from Turkey at the minute. I'm not sure whether you can see those, Elise, but again, it shows that people are still searching through the rubble. I mean, we're now 4 days into this awful natural disaster. People are starting to lose hope now, Elise, I'm sure, in terms of recovering their loved ones.
Yeah, honestly, we're trying our best to have hope. While I was back in London, as UCL, we organized a bake sale as well for the British Red Cross, because British Red Cross is working with Turkey. And we raised over £11,000. And this is what we're trying to stay hopeful for, because if we don't have hope at this point, what are we going to do in London? What are my Turkish friends, my Turkish community will do in London? What else do we have other than hope at this point? And still, because of the international help, because of the Turkish community, still people are found within rubbles and they're still alive. And that is hope for us. There's nothing else that we can do other than send help and pray.
And there's been some really heartbreaking photographs of hope, I have to say, of little babies being found in the rubble. But I have to say, looking at those pictures live from Turkey at this point in time, they're using quite heavy machinery to get through some of the rubble. And just to finish, Elise, there's been a lot of anger which has been developing throughout some of the awful funerals that have been taking place because of the infrastructure that was in place, the fact that a lot of it wasn't compliant with building regulations and building controls. Have you seen, of course you've just arrived, but I presume that you've heard of that anger developing?
Yes, definitely. That anger was always there. Most Turkish people have been trying to reach the authorities as well, stating that the buildings are not safe. We're scared that an earthquake will happen in Istanbul again, because it happened in 1999 and we weren't prepared. We need to be prepared. They need to check the buildings way better. The authorities should hear us and check the buildings, because we could have prevented this. We could have prevented this many casualties. But I'm really angry as well, and I believe Turkey has all the right, all the citizens have all the right to be angry at this point, because the people that built these houses did not do it properly.
OK, well, Elise, thank you so much for joining us from Istanbul today and taking the time out to speak to us back here in the UK. That's Elise. She's gone over there to Istanbul to be with the Turkish people. Well, on Wednesday this week, the Supreme Court handed down a judgment in a case brought by a group of unionist politicians, including my good self. The court ruled that the protocol had been made lawfully, but provided much-needed clarity around how the protocol had modified the Act of Union and the Northern Ireland Act, which gives effect to the Belfast Agreement. Now, this all comes at a time when negotiations continue between the United Kingdom and the European Union. Joining me now to discuss the latest developments is Roderick Crawford. He's a senior research fellow at the think tank Policy Exchange. Roderick, first of all, I'm going to ask you for your reaction to the court case, and where does it take us in terms of finding a solution?
Well, I think I'm not surprised at the result of the court case. Courts have constantly ruled in favour of the government, and it's empowered to. Parliament is sovereign; it can do what it wants, and so forth and so on. So I think in one sense, it's the end of the road. I think for that sort of action for unionists, the legal course. Yeah. I think the concentration's got to go back onto politics for unionists. We're currently obviously in several months down the line on a series of negotiations with the European Union. And those have mostly been technical so far. Those technical negotiations are mostly designed to arrange mechanisms to avoid threats to the European Union's single market. That allows more flexibility for the arrangements that the protocol puts in place. I think where those negotiations have got to go is that they're going to have to go to a political level, because there is only a certain amount of flexibility the technical teams can possibly have operating within the mandate that the European Union has, imagines that it has. Now, I've just published a big report for Policy Exchange on this, and it's my second report for them. And what's interesting is if you go back to the origins of the protocol, the original legal mandate to the European commission from the Council, that's the member states, was that nothing in the withdrawal agreement could undermine the commitments, the objectives and commitments of the Good Friday Agreement. Now, their understanding of the Good Friday Agreement was one that was rather sold to them by the Irish government.
Sure.
And one of their leading officials described it as the Irish interpretation. And this, of course, stressed north-south elements of the Good Friday Agreement. So the Council, the North-South Council of Ministers, Ministerial Council, and so forth. So that's what the protocol, from the European Union's perspective, had to protect. But it commits, interestingly, to protect the Good Friday Agreement in all its dimensions, and that's very specific language. And the Good Friday Agreement, of course, is much wider than North-South. It's also East-West, or perhaps better to say Northern Ireland, Great Britain, or UK dimension.
Yeah.
And that's a much bigger dimension. In terms of...
And constitutionally a very important dimension,
Constitutionally, it's the constitutional reality of Northern Ireland, and that's what the Belfast Agreement, Good Friday Agreement, actually guarantees.
Yeah, so I often think that perhaps either the Belfast Agreement was misrepresented to the European Union or misunderstood by the European Union, or possibly both.
Both,
because, of course, the Belfast Agreement is very clear that the Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom until such times... Fully part. Until such times as the people of Northern Ireland decide otherwise.
Yeah, exactly so.
And this protocol, of course, goes into the middle of that, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. So it imposes all these checks on trade between the UK, within the UK, between Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
And that, of course, operationally it's very difficult. It's logistical nightmare.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting that the European Union designed this protocol to operate. You remember Barnier's expression that any solution had to be operational and it had to be legal. And as it turned out, this protocol wasn't operational. If you implement it fully, it just breaks down.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes I think what we're witnessing is the clash between legality, which the European Union are very keen on. As we know, they're very much into their legal framework, and politics, real politics.
Yeah.
Would you say that that's a good characterisation?
That's 100% correct, but I think also there are interconnections. So the European Union's mandate is that nothing can undermine the commitments and objectives of the Good Friday Agreement. Now, the protocol, which is their solution to this, actually does undermine the Good Friday Agreement. And they, I think, are under the misapprehension, bizarrely, that the Good Friday Agreement's achievement was to create no hard border on the island of Ireland. Now, that was the completion of the single European market in 1992. The Good Friday Agreement's great objective was to create a constitutional consensus in Northern Ireland about its governance, power sharing, devolved government, and the operation of the consent principle on the constitutional question.
Yeah.
So that's the genius of the Good Friday Agreement. And there are some additional factors like North-South cooperation that are important, of course. Now, when we see the collapse of the institutions, which happened in February, we see a manifestation of the collapse of that constitutional consensus. This court action is a sign of the collapse of the constitutional consensus. Unionists are in court decrying what's happened, and you know that is all a sign that the main objective of the Good Friday Agreement has been undermined by the protocol. Yeah. Now that's an irony, but I think that the European Union has got some recognition of this, but I think it's still also in denial. I mean, it's an inconvenient truth. To find that its great solution has become the great problem.
Yeah. Well, Roderick, I mean, I think we talk about people misrepresenting the Belfast Agreement, but surely it's up to our diplomats to make sure that they understand the Belfast Agreement and that it actually, what they're doing is interfering with that Belfast Agreement. But Roderick, thank you for coming in and explaining that in such simple terms. Well, it's been a busy week for President Zelenskyy. On Wednesday, he addressed the UK Parliament and praised the response of the British people in the wake of the Russian invasion of his country, saying that Britain was the first to stand with the people of Ukraine. And whilst reinforcing his plea for the UK to lead and be the first country to commit to sending fighter jets to the country, he then left Britain to travel across Europe, pleading with countries to provide Ukraine with more weaponry to combat expected Russian offences within the coming months. Today marks the final day of his tour, so it's very much crunch time for Mr. Zelenskyy. Will he fly back to Kyiv, having secured new fighter jets for his country? Well, joining me now to discuss all of this is Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford. Thanks for joining us, Stuart. What did you make of the Zelenskyy circus coming into town on Wednesday?
Well, I thought it was quite remarkable, actually. He was greeted as a bit of a hero, certainly when he came to the UK. And if you strip away the pomp and circumstance that would usually accompany such visits in peacetime, it was very much almost a state visit, being met by the Prime Minister at the airport, taken to Downing Street, addressing both Houses of Parliament, and then down to Dorset to visit Ukrainian troops training under British instructors on the Challenger 2 tank. So I think maybe there were a number of purposes for his visit. I think the first was to keep Ukraine in the public eye, if you like, to thank the United Kingdom and European allies for their support, and also to press them not to let the Ukrainian conflict fall off their radar and get war-weary. And in that, I think he might have been successful. As for the fighter jets, well, I think we're going to have to wait and see a bit longer.
Yeah, and I mean, Stuart, he very deliberately came to the UK, didn't he, before he went to Europe? Obviously, he's been in the United States of America. They're the biggest, in terms of volume, supporter of Ukraine, and then came to the UK. I mean, everybody wants a piece of Zelenskyy at the moment. Everybody wants to get photographed with President Zelenskyy. Did you think, though, there was a deliberate significance to the fact that he came to the UK first?
Well, it's difficult to tell. I mean, I've read elsewhere that the original plan was to go to France first and then come to the UK afterwards. So I wouldn't really want to sort of stir up that sort of, if you like, difficulty or competition. I think the important point is that he came. Whether we can deliver what he's looking for, and that boils down to fast fighter jet warplanes, is another thing altogether. I think we've taken a slight tentative step towards that by promising that we'll train Ukrainian pilots, but that's still some way away from giving him the equipment that they and he need.
And Stuart, you're an expert, finally, on warcraft, if I can put it like that. The first anniversary is coming up of the invasion of Ukraine. Where do you see things at the moment in terms of Russian aggression? Is there a new phase coming? What do we expect to see for the anniversary, if you like, which is coming up at the end of February?
I think the first thing, the most important thing to note is that Ukraine hasn't lost. The government is still in power in Kiev, and most of the Ukrainian territory remains in Ukraine's hands. There's no doubt that there will be another outbreak of fighting in the fairly near future, I would think. And of course, there are reports that the Russians are massing troops in the Donbass to continue their operation there. I don't know if Ukraine yet has enough equipment and wherewithal to take the offensive itself. And the reason that Zelenskyy is asking for the fighter jets is that they are a prerequisite for a successful attack to throw the Russians out. My personal view is that we need to give him the tools to finish the job.
Yeah. Colonel Stuart Crawford, thank you so much for joining us there and giving us your expertise. Finishing off then with Emma, Northern Ireland Protocol, Zelenskyy. Is there anything you want to add to what we've just heard this afternoon?
Yeah, that visit from Zelenskyy on Wednesday sort of came out of the blue. It was a sort of, you called it a circus. It was a sort of charm offensive. It was like a rock star visit, state visit. It was everything rolled into one. Is there anything this man can't do? And as you say, everybody wants a piece of him. MPs were literally jostling like children for selfies.
I mean, I looked at the photograph in Europe and these 27 leaders trying to get in beside him.
Absolutely.
And, you know, I understand that this is a man who has shown incredible stamina, leadership, resilience.
And that balance between keeping it on the agenda but not reverting. I mean, he used to be a movie star, right? You know, not reverting to that. He's still out there with his people, and yet he understands the importance of, you know, getting out to other countries, diplomacy, exactly. So, you know, and I think you talk about his resilience and the resilience of the Ukrainian people. I think that's what, if anything, carries them through. It's, as you say, a year. In 2 weeks' time, it's been a year anniversary.
It's hard to believe, because I remember sitting in this very studio the weekend after it happened.
I remember the 24th of February.
Yeah. And everybody thought it would be over pretty quickly. But it's a year.
And now no end in sight, really. I mean, you know, Ben Wallace maybe kind of slightly rowing back on the idea of sending fighter jets. So, I mean, who knows where it goes from here? But
yeah, it's It's been a fascinating watch and a very difficult watch at times as well because of everything that's going on in Ukraine. But you've been watching The Briefing. It has gone very quickly this afternoon with me, Arlene Foster. The show's back every Friday from 2 p.m. Up next, it's Patrick Christie's.
Good afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin and this is your latest weather update. Not much rain around this weekend, not a huge amount of sunshine either. It will be fairly cloudy, but for most of us it'll be a bit warmer than it has been for much of this week. Here's the reason for the dry weather, a big area of high pressure. But notice the isobars closely packed together across the north. It is very windy out there at the moment, and this weather front is still bringing some outbreaks of rain to the highlands of Scotland. That'll last for much of the evening. Still very gusty as well over northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland. The winds will slowly ease through the night. Further south, the winds are light. We could see a bit of mist and fog, but generally this cloud keeping the temperatures up well above freezing. We'll start the weekend at some 6s and 7s for most. So, as I said, much milder than many a morning has been this week. It will be a fairly grey day tomorrow, lots of cloud. We may continue to see some light rain and drizzle here and there, the hills of Wales, some western coast.